The morning sun painted golden streaks across the windows of Adelaide Cottage as Catherine, Princess of Wales, sat quietly in her favorite armchair. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the letter that had arrived just hours before. The royal seal at the top seemed to mock her with its grandeur, while the words inside felt like daggers piercing through her heart. William entered the room, his footsteps echoing softly on the hardwood floor. He had been in meetings all morning discussing matters of state and royal duties, completely unaware of the storm that was about to engulf their carefully constructed world. His smile faded the moment he saw Catherine's pale face and the way she clutched the official document. "What is it, darling?" he asked, settling beside her on the small sofa. His voice carried that gentle tone he reserved only for her, the one that had melted her heart during their university days at St. Andrews. Those seemed like a lifetime ago now when they were just William and Kate, two young people falling in love without the weight of a kingdom on their shoulders. Catherine's voice caught in her throat as she tried to speak. The words felt impossible to say aloud, as if speaking them would make the nightmare real. She had read the letter 3 times, hoping each time that she had misunderstood something, that there was some mistake or misinterpretation. But the language was clear, clinical, and devastating. "The doctors," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They want to see me again. The tests from last week, they found something." William's world shifted in that moment. The man who had been trained from birth to remain composed in any situation felt his carefully maintained facade beginning to crack. He had faced down critics, hostile media, and the pressures of royal life with unwavering strength. But this was different. This was Catherine, his anchor, his reason for believing that love could survive even in their goldfish bowl existence. He took the letter from her shaking hands, his eyes scanning the medical terminology that might as well have been written in a foreign language. Words like irregular and further testing required and urgent consultation jumped out at him, each one feeling like a physical blow. The appointment was scheduled for the following Monday at a private clinic in London, away from the prying eyes of the press. "We'll face this together," he said, though his own voice betrayed the fear he was trying so hard to hide. "Whatever this is, whatever it means, we'll get through it." Catherine leaned into his embrace, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek. It was the same heartbeat she had listened to on countless nights, the one that had comforted her through the early days of royal life, when every public appearance felt like walking through a minefield. Now even that familiar sound couldn't chase away the cold fear that had settled in her chest. Their children were at school, blissfully unaware that their world might be about to change forever. George was excelling in his studies, always the serious one, already showing signs of the responsibility that would one day be his. Charlotte was her usual spirited self, bringing laughter and chaos wherever she went. Little Louis was still discovering the world with the wonder that only a young child possesses. The thought of her children made Catherine's resolve strengthen slightly. Whatever was coming, she needed to be strong for them. They had already lost one grandmother to tragedy, and the family had worked so hard to create stability and normalcy in their lives. The last thing they needed was another crisis to shake their foundation. William pulled back to look at her face, memorizing every detail as if seeing her for the first time. Her green eyes, usually so bright and full of life, were clouded with worry. Her dark hair fell in gentle waves around her shoulders, and he resisted the urge to reach out and touch it, as if the simple gesture could somehow protect her from whatever was coming. "Do you remember our first proper date?" he asked suddenly, hoping to distract her from the dark thoughts he could see swirling in her mind. "When I cooked for you at Balmoral?" A small smile tugged at the corners of Catherine's mouth despite everything. "You nearly burned down the kitchen trying to impress me with that salmon," she replied, her voice slightly stronger now. "I knew then that you were hopeless in the kitchen, but I loved you anyway." "I still am hopeless in the kitchen," William admitted, earning a genuine laugh from his wife. "But I'd burn down 1,000 kitchens if it meant seeing you smile like that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in memories of simpler times. Their courtship had been far from conventional, interrupted by royal duties and the constant presence of bodyguards. But somehow they had found moments of normalcy, stolen hours where they could just be themselves without the weight of crowns and expectations. The sound of a car in the driveway broke their reverie. Catherine's private secretary was arriving for their weekly briefing about upcoming engagements. There were charity events to attend, speeches to give, and hands to shake. The work of the monarchy never stopped, not even for personal crises. "Should I cancel everything?" William asked, already reaching for his phone to contact his own staff. "No," Catherine said firmly, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. "Not yet. We don't know anything for certain. Life goes on until we know more." But even as she spoke the words, both of them knew that their lives had already changed irrevocably. The letter on the coffee table seemed to pulse with its own dark energy, a reminder that some things were beyond their control, beyond the protection that wealth and position could provide. As Catherine stood to greet her secretary, William watched. Her move with the grace that had first caught his attention all those years ago. She squared her shoulders and lifted her chin, transforming before his eyes from a worried wife back into the Princess of Wales. It was a transformation he had witnessed countless times, but it never failed to fill him with admiration. Whatever the coming days would bring, he knew they would face it with the same dignity and strength that had carried them through every challenge so far. But deep in his heart, a small voice whispered that this time might be different. This time, love and determination might not be enough. The private clinic in central London was a world away from the usual pomp and ceremony of royal life. Catherine sat in the sterile waiting room, her fingers interlaced with William's as they waited for her name to be called. The walls were painted in calming shades of blue and green, and soft classical music played from hidden speakers, but nothing could ease the tension that filled the air between them. Other patients sat nearby, each lost in their own worries and fears. An elderly gentleman read a newspaper with shaking hands, while a young woman scrolled through her phone with nervous energy. Catherine found herself wondering about their stories, their fears, their hopes. In this place, stripped of titles and protocol, they were all just human beings facing the unknown. Dr. Sarah Matthews had been Catherine's physician for several years, a warm and competent woman who had guided her through 3 pregnancies and countless minor health concerns. When she appeared in the doorway and called Catherine's name, her usual bright smile seemed forced, and William felt his stomach drop. The consultation room was small and cramped, with medical certificates covering one wall and a desk cluttered with patient files. Dr. Matthews gestured for them to sit in the 2 chairs facing her desk, and Catherine noticed how the doctor's hands seemed to fidget with her pen as she settled into her chair. "Thank you both for coming so quickly," Dr. Matthews began, her voice professional but tinged with something that made Catherine's heart race. "I wanted to discuss the results of your recent blood work and the imaging we did last week." The doctor opened a thick folder and spread several papers across her desk. To Catherine, they looked like hieroglyphics, meaningless squiggles and numbers that somehow held the key to her future. William leaned forward slightly, his journalist instincts kicking in as he tried to read the medical terminology upside down. "The initial tests showed some irregularities that concerned us," Dr. Matthews continued, her eyes meeting Catherine's directly. "The follow-up imaging has confirmed our suspicions. Catherine, you have a condition that requires immediate attention and treatment." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Catherine felt the room spinning around her, and she gripped William's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She had prepared herself for bad news, but hearing it spoken aloud was somehow worse than she had imagined. "What kind of condition?" William asked, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. Years of royal training had taught him to remain calm in crisis situations, and those lessons served him well now. Dr. Matthews explained the diagnosis in careful, measured terms using medical language that softened the harsh reality, without hiding it completely. She spoke of treatment options, survival rates, and the importance of acting quickly. Catherine heard every word, but they seemed to be coming from very far away, as if she were listening to someone else's conversation. "How long do I have?" Catherine asked suddenly, interrupting the doctor's explanation about chemotherapy protocols. The question came out sharper than she intended, but she needed to know. She needed facts, not cushioned explanations. "With aggressive treatment, many patients in your situation live full, productive lives," Dr. Matthews replied carefully. "But I won't lie to you, Catherine. This is serious and we need to begin treatment immediately." The word immediately hit Catherine like a physical blow. There would be no time to prepare gradually, no chance to ease into this new reality. Her carefully planned schedule of royal engagements would have to be abandoned. The charity work that gave her life meaning would have to wait. Everything would have to wait. William asked practical questions about treatment centers, side effects, and timelines. His mind was already working through the logistics of managing this crisis while maintaining their public duties. How would they explain Catherine's sudden withdrawal from public life? How could they protect their children from the media storm that would inevitably follow? But beneath his practical concerns, William was grappling with a fear so profound it threatened to overwhelm him. He had lost his mother when he was just 15, and the trauma of that loss had shaped every relationship since. The thought of losing Catherine, of their children growing up without their mother, was almost too terrible to contemplate. After the appointment, they sat in their car in the clinic's parking garage, neither speaking for several long minutes. The concrete walls seemed to press in around them, and the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across their faces. Catherine stared at the folder of medical information in her lap, as if the papers might suddenly rearrange themselves into better news. "We need to tell the children," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "They deserve to know before anyone else." William nodded, though the thought of explaining this to George, Charlotte, and Louis felt impossible. How do you tell a child that their mother is seriously ill? How do you maintain hope while being honest about the gravity of the situation? "We'll tell them together," he said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Tonight after dinner. We'll make it as gentle as possible." They drove home in relative silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The familiar landmarks of London passed by the windows, but everything looked different now, as if the diagnosis had changed the very color of the world. People walked along the sidewalks, going about their daily lives, completely unaware that the future Queen of England was fighting for her life just a few feet away. Back at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine went through the motions of normalcy. She helped Louis with his reading, listened to Charlotte's excited chatter about her school play, and reviewed George's mathematics homework. Each mundane interaction felt precious now, charged with new meaning. William watched her with their children, marveling at her ability to compartmentalize her fear for their sake. She laughed at Louis's silly jokes, praised Charlotte's artwork, and patiently explained a difficult math concept to George. To an outside observer, it would have seemed like any other ordinary afternoon in a loving family home. But William could see the subtle signs of strain. The way Catherine's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands when she thought no one was looking, the way she lingered a little too long when tucking each child into bed that night. After the children were finally asleep, William and Catherine sat in their bedroom, still in their day clothes, staring at the medical folder that lay open between them on the bed. The treatment plan was aggressive and comprehensive, but it would mean months of uncertainty, of hoping and waiting and fighting. "I'm scared," Catherine admitted, the first time she had voiced her fear aloud since receiving the diagnosis, not of dying exactly, but of leaving them, of not being there for all the moments that matter. William moved closer and pulled her into his arms, feeling the weight of her fear and his own crushing responsibility. He was supposed to protect her, to shield her from harm, but this enemy was invisible and beyond his power to fight. "You're not going anywhere," he whispered into her hair, trying to convince himself as much as her. "We're going to fight this together, and we're going to win." But even as he spoke the words, William couldn't shake the feeling that their world was about to change in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The battle ahead would test not just Catherine's physical strength, but the very foundations of their family and their love. The first chemotherapy session took place on a gray Thursday morning at a private treatment center in London. Catherine had insisted on driving herself there, maintaining some sense of independence even as her world crumbled around her. William sat beside her in the passenger seat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap as they navigated through the busy London traffic. The treatment center was nothing like the sterile hospital rooms Catherine had imagined. Instead, it felt more like an upscale hotel, with comfortable recliners arranged in a sunny room overlooking a small garden. Other patients were already settled in their chairs, some reading, others sleeping, all connected to IV drips that carried both hope and poison through their veins. Catherine's oncologist, Dr. James Harrison, was a kind man in his 50s, who had treated members of several royal families across Europe. He explained each step of the process with gentle precision, checking and double-checking medications while a specialized nurse prepared Catherine's treatment chair. "The first session is often the most daunting," Dr. Harrison said as Catherine settled into the leather recliner. "But I want you to remember that every drop of this medication is fighting for your recovery." William pulled a chair close to Catherine's side, opening a book of poetry that had been one of their wedding gifts. They had decided that he would read aloud during each treatment session, creating something beautiful to focus on while the chemicals did their work. His voice was steady as he began with William Wordsworth, the same poet whose work they had studied together at university. The hours passed slowly. Catherine dozed fitfully, her hand never leaving William's. He watched her face for any signs of discomfort, ready to call for help at the first indication that something was wrong. The other patients in the room became a strange sort of family, sharing quiet conversations and offering encouragement to newcomers. Mrs. Eleanor Price, an elderly woman receiving treatment for the same condition, became Catherine's unofficial mentor. During their second session together, she pulled her chair closer to Catherine's and shared stories of her own journey through treatment and recovery. "The hardest part isn't the medicine," Mrs. Price said, her voice warm with wisdom earned through experience. "It's the waiting, the uncertainty. But you learn to find joy in small moments, a child's laugh, the taste of your favorite tea, the feeling of your husband's hand in yours." Catherine found comfort in these unexpected friendships. In the treatment center, titles and status meant nothing. They were all warriors fighting the same invisible enemy, bound together by shared vulnerability and hope. Meanwhile, William struggled with his own demons. Palace officials pressed him for decisions about Catherine's public schedule, about which events she could reasonably attend and which would need to be canceled or postponed. The constant juggling of royal duties and personal crisis left him exhausted and short-tempered. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of treatment, William found himself shouting at his private secretary over a scheduling conflict. The moment the words left his mouth, he was filled with shame. These people were trying to help, to maintain some semblance of normalcy while his world fell apart. "I'm sorry," he said, sinking into his office chair. "This isn't your fault. None of this is anyone's fault." His secretary, a loyal man who had served the royal family for 20 years, simply nodded with understanding. "Perhaps it's time to consider making a public statement, sir. The speculation in the media is becoming quite intense." William knew he was right. Photographers had noticed Catherine's absence from recent events, and tabloid headlines were growing bolder in their speculation. It was only a matter of time before someone discovered the truth, and when that happened, the feeding frenzy would be merciless. That night, William and Catherine sat in their garden as the children played nearby. The autumn air was crisp and leaves danced across the lawn in gentle spirals. Charlotte was teaching Louis a clapping game while George read under a large oak tree, occasionally looking up to watch his siblings with the serious expression that made him seem far older than his years. "We need to tell the world," Catherine said quietly, voicing what they had both been thinking, on our terms, in our own words, before they discover it for themselves. William nodded, though the thought of exposing Catherine's illness to public scrutiny made his stomach churn. He had seen how the media could dissect and analyze every aspect of their lives, turning private moments into public entertainment. But Catherine was right. They needed to control the narrative while they still could. They spent the evening crafting a statement that was honest but hopeful, medical but accessible. Catherine insisted on writing most of it herself, determined that her own voice should tell her story. William watched her work, marveling at her strength even as he mourned the loss of their privacy. The statement was released on a Monday morning, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages of support poured in from around the world, from heads of state and ordinary citizens alike. The palace switchboard was flooded with calls, and social media exploded with expressions of love and encouragement. But with the support came the inevitable scrutiny. Medical experts offered opinions about Catherine's prognosis on television news programs. Photographers camped outside the treatment center, hoping for glimpses of the princess during her sessions. Every public appearance was analyzed for signs of her condition's progression. George, Charlotte, and Louis handled the revelation with remarkable maturity, though each in their own way. George became even more protective of his mother, often staying close to her side during family time. Charlotte asked endless questions about the medicine and how it worked, her curious mind trying to understand the science behind her mother's treatment. Louis, too young to fully grasp the situation's gravity, simply accepted that Mummy was taking special medicine to feel better. The children's school was incredibly supportive, working with palace security to ensure their normal routines could continue with minimal disruption. Their teachers were briefed on the situation and kept a careful eye on the children's emotional well-being without making them feel different or pitied. One afternoon, as Catherine rested after a particularly difficult treatment session, Charlotte climbed onto her bed with a drawing she had made at school. The picture showed their family standing together under a rainbow, with Catherine wearing a crown made of flowers instead of jewels. "The teacher said we should draw something that makes us happy," Charlotte explained, snuggling against her mother's side. "I drew us because we're together, and that makes me happy even when you're not feeling well." Catherine held her daughter close, tears streaming down her face as she studied the innocent artwork. In her child's drawing, she saw hope and love untouched by fear or doubt. It was exactly what she needed to see, a reminder that their family's happiness didn't depend on perfect health or ideal circumstances. That evening, William found Catherine sitting in their bedroom, Charlotte's drawing propped on her nightstand where she could see it from bed. He sat beside her, following her gaze to the colorful crayon marks that somehow captured more truth than any medical scan or laboratory report. "She's right, you know," he said softly. "We are happy, even in the middle of all this. We're together, we're fighting, and we're not giving up." Catherine leaned against his shoulder, feeling stronger than she had in weeks. Tomorrow would bring another treatment session, more medications, more uncertainty. But tonight, surrounded by evidence of their children's love and her husband's unwavering support, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The turning point came on a cold February morning, 6 months after Catherine's treatment had begun. Dr. Harrison's face was unreadable as he reviewed the latest scan results, his fingers tracing patterns across the computer screen that meant everything and nothing to the anxious couple sitting across from him. Catherine had lost weight during the treatment, her face thinner than it had ever been, but her eyes remained bright with determination. William sat beside her, his own face showing the strain of months spent balancing royal duties with the role of caregiver and emotional support. Neither of them spoke as they waited for the doctor's verdict. "The scans show significant improvement," Dr. Harrison finally said, his professional composure cracking slightly to reveal a genuine smile. "The treatment is working better than we had hoped. We're seeing substantial reduction in all the affected areas." Catherine felt her knees go weak with relief, even though she was sitting down. The words she had been desperate to hear for so long seemed almost too good to be true. William's hand found hers automatically, their fingers interlacing in a gesture that had become second nature during their months of shared anxiety. "What does this mean exactly?" William asked, his voice carefully controlled. He had learned not to let hope run too far ahead of medical facts, but he couldn't quite suppress the joy that was beginning to bloom in his chest. Dr. Harrison explained the technical details, the percentages and measurements that translated into hope. Catherine would need to continue treatment for several more months, but the prognosis had shifted dramatically in their favor. The word remission was mentioned for the first time, hanging in the air like a prayer answered. Walking out of the medical center that day, Catherine felt as though she was seeing the world with new eyes. The London streets that had seemed gray and threatening during her illness now appeared vibrant and full of possibility. Even the February cold felt invigorating rather than harsh. They decided to celebrate quietly that evening, just the 5 of them gathered around the kitchen table at Adelaide Cottage. William attempted to cook Catherine's favorite meal, with predictably chaotic results that had the children giggling and Catherine directing operations from her chair. "Dad, you're burning the sauce again," George observed with the dry wit that was becoming his trademark. "I think Papa needs cooking lessons," Charlotte added, standing on a chair to peer into the smoking pan. "Lessons, lessons," Louis chanted, clapping his hands with delight at the family chaos. Catherine laughed until tears streamed down her face, the sound filling the kitchen with joy that had been in short supply for too long. This was what she had been fighting for, these ordinary moments of family happiness that had seemed so precious when she thought she might lose them forever. The news of Catherine's improving condition was shared carefully with the public, bringing waves of celebration from around the world. The palace was flooded with flowers, cards, and gifts from well-wishers who had followed her journey with genuine concern and affection. But recovery brought its own challenges. Catherine found herself struggling with what doctors called survivor's guilt, wondering why she was improving when others in her treatment group continued to decline. Mrs. Eleanor Price, her treatment center mentor, had taken a turn for the worse, and Catherine visited her whenever possible, trying to offer the same comfort and wisdom she had received. "You can't feel guilty for getting better, dear," Mrs. Price said during one of these visits, her voice weaker than it had been but her spirit unchanged. "Your job now is to live fully, to make every day count. That's how you honor those of us who might not be so fortunate." Catherine took these words to heart, gradually resuming some of her royal duties while continuing treatment. Her first public appearance after the diagnosis was at a children's hospital, where she met young patients who were fighting their own battles with serious illnesses. The interaction was both heartbreaking and inspiring, reminding her of the privilege of her platform and the responsibility that came with survival. The children had adapted to their new normal with the resilience that young people possess. George had become Catherine's unofficial medication scheduler, using his love of organization to help track treatment times and doctor appointments. Charlotte had developed an interest in medical science, asking detailed questions about how medicines work, and declaring her intention to become a doctor when she grew up. Louis, with the innocence of early childhood, had simply accepted that sometimes people got sick and needed special medicine to get better. His unwavering faith that his mother would recover had been a source of strength for the entire family. One evening in late March, as spring began to show itself in the garden at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine found herself alone for the first time in months. William was attending a charity dinner, the children were in bed, and the house was peacefully quiet. She walked through the rooms that had become her refuge during the darkest days of her illness, touching familiar objects and remembering the fear that had once filled these spaces. Now those same rooms felt full of hope and possibility again. In the drawing room, she picked up the medical folder that had started this whole journey. The papers inside looked different now, less threatening, more like historical documents from a battle that was being won rather than lost. She thought about burning them, making a ceremonial goodbye to this chapter of her life, but decided instead to keep them as a reminder of how precious ordinary days really were. Her phone buzzed with a text from William. "Thinking of you. Can't wait to come home and celebrate another good day together." Catherine smiled as she typed back, "Celebrating every single one. See you soon." As she prepared for bed that night, Catherine caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at her was thinner than before, marked by the experiences of the past months, but it was still unmistakably her. More importantly, it was the face of someone who had fought and was winning. She thought about the countless people around the world who were fighting similar battles, some with happy endings and others with more difficult outcomes. Her privilege and resources had undoubtedly helped her access the best possible care, but the fear, uncertainty, and hope were universal experiences that connected her to every person who had ever received devastating news in a doctor's office. The next morning brought another treatment session, but this one felt different. Catherine walked into the center with her head held high, greeting the staff and fellow patients with genuine warmth rather than the polite bravery that had carried her through the early days. Dr. Harrison noticed the change immediately. "You look like yourself again," he observed as Catherine settled into her familiar chair. "I feel like myself again," she replied, and realized as she said it that it was completely true. She was still fighting, still taking medications that made her tired and occasionally sick, but she was no longer afraid of losing herself to the illness. William arrived halfway through the session, carrying coffee and the morning newspapers. He had made it a point to maintain as much normalcy as possible during Catherine's treatment, and these small gestures of ordinary life had become precious rituals. "Any interesting news today?" Catherine asked as he settled into the chair beside her. "Nothing more interesting than this," he replied, gesturing around the treatment room where hope was being delivered one IV drip at a time. "Nothing more important than right here, right now." And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of medical equipment and the gentle conversation of fellow patients, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that they were going to be all right. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, strengthened by everything they had already overcome. The final treatment session arrived on a bright June morning, almost exactly 1 year after Catherine's journey had begun. The same treatment center that had once felt like a foreign and frightening place now felt like a second home, filled with familiar faces and shared stories of courage. Catherine sat in her usual chair, but this time the atmosphere was celebratory rather than anxious. The other patients had decorated her treatment area with handmade cards and small gifts, creating an impromptu graduation ceremony for someone who had become like family to them all. "I never thought I'd be sad to leave a place where I got chemotherapy," Catherine told Mrs. Eleanor Price, who had defied all expectations and was also nearing the end of her own successful treatment. "But this place, these people, they've become part of my story." Mrs. Price, now much stronger and with her trademark humor fully restored, laughed warmly. "Oh, my dear, we're not saying goodbye. We're saying see you later and stay well. Some friendships are forged in fire and those bonds don't break easily." Dr. Harrison performed the final medical checks with obvious satisfaction. The scans showed continued improvement, and Catherine's blood work had returned to normal ranges across all indicators. The word he had been careful not to use too early was finally appropriate: remission. "You've been an extraordinary patient," he told Catherine as they reviewed her final results. "Your positive attitude and determination undoubtedly contributed to this excellent outcome. But more than that, you've brought hope to everyone who's been privileged to be part of your care team." William helped Catherine gather the small mementos she had accumulated during her months of treatment. A lucky stone from Louis, a prayer card from Charlotte, a bookmark from George, and dozens of notes from well-wishers around the world. Each item told a story of love and support that had carried her through the darkest moments. As they walked out of the treatment center for the last time, Catherine paused at the entrance to look back. The building that had once seemed like a symbol of everything frightening and unknown now represented something entirely different: resilience, healing, and the incredible capacity of human beings to support one another through the most difficult circumstances. The return to full royal duties was gradual and carefully managed. Catherine's first major public appearance was at the annual summer garden party at Buckingham Palace, an event that had always been one of her favorites. The guests that day included many people who had written to her during her illness, and she made a point of seeking them out to thank them personally for their kindness. "Your cards and letters kept me going on the hardest days," she told a group of schoolchildren who had sent her a massive collection of drawings and good wishes. "Every time I felt scared or tired, I thought about all of you cheering me on, and it made me feel stronger." The children listened with wide eyes, amazed that their simple drawings had reached the princess and made a difference in her recovery. One little girl, no more than 6 years old, raised her hand tentatively. "Princess Catherine, when you were sick, were you still brave?" Catherine knelt down to the child's level, thinking carefully about her answer. "You know what I learned? Being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you do what you need to do even when you are scared. I was scared lots of times, but I kept taking my medicine and going to my appointments because I wanted to get better and come back to see wonderful people like you." The interaction was captured by photographers and became one of the most beloved images of Catherine's return to public life. It showed not just her recovery, but the wisdom and empathy she had gained through her experience with serious illness. Behind the scenes, the family dynamic had evolved in profound ways. The children had developed a deeper appreciation for their mother's strength and a more mature understanding of life's fragility and preciousness. George, in particular, had grown up significantly during the crisis, showing leadership qualities and emotional intelligence that impressed everyone around him. Charlotte had indeed maintained her interest in medical science, conducting elaborate pretend doctor visits for her stuffed animals and explaining to anyone who would listen how different medicines work in the body. Her teachers reported that she had become more compassionate with classmates who were struggling, offering help and encouragement with natural grace. Louis, now old enough to understand more about what had happened, had developed an almost protective attitude toward his mother. He insisted on extra hugs and kisses, as if trying to make up for the time when she hadn't felt well enough for his usual energetic displays of affection. William had perhaps changed the most of all. The experience of nearly losing Catherine had stripped away the last remnants of the emotional walls he had built after his mother's death. He was more open with his feelings, more present in family moments, and more willing to show vulnerability in public when appropriate. One evening in late summer, as the family gathered for dinner in their cottage garden, Catherine reflected on how different this scene was from a year ago. Then every meal had been a struggle, every day a question mark. Now the simple pleasure of eating outdoors with her family felt like the greatest luxury imaginable. "Mummy, tell us the story about when you got better," Charlotte requested, settling into her favorite spot beside Catherine's chair. Catherine had learned to tell this story in a way that was honest, but age-appropriate, focusing on the helpers, the hope and the love that had surrounded her throughout the experience. "Well," she began, "once upon a time there was a princess who got sick and needed special medicine." As she spoke, William watched his family with deep contentment. The story Catherine told was one of triumph over adversity, of love conquering fear, and of the extraordinary power of hope. It was a story their children would carry with them forever, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light could find a way through. The months following Catherine's recovery brought unexpected opportunities for service. She had become a passionate advocate for cancer research and patient support, using her platform to highlight the experiences of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Her first major speech after recovery was at a medical conference, where she spoke directly to doctors and researchers about the patient perspective. "When you're sitting in that chair, receiving treatment, you're not a princess or a commoner," she told the assembled medical professionals. "You're simply a human being hoping for more time with the people you love. The compassion and expertise you bring to that moment can literally mean the difference between despair and hope." The speech was met with a standing ovation, but more importantly, it led to concrete changes in patient care protocols at hospitals across the country. Catherine's ability to articulate the emotional journey of serious illness, combined with her unique platform, created real improvements in how patients were treated and supported. William had found his own way to channel the experience into meaningful work. He became deeply involved with organizations supporting families of seriously ill patients, understanding firsthand the stress and fear that loved ones experience during medical crises. His natural empathy, enhanced by personal experience, made him an incredibly effective advocate. One particularly moving moment came when William visited a children's hospital and met a young father whose wife was undergoing treatment, similar to what Catherine had experienced. The man was trying to maintain hope while caring for two small children and managing his own fear and exhaustion. "I don't know how to do this," the father confessed during their private conversation. "I don't know how to be strong enough for all of them." William sat with him in silence for a moment, remembering his own feelings of helplessness and terror. "You don't have to be strong every moment," he finally said. "You just have to show up day after day and love them through it. That's what strength really looks like." The conversation reminded William of how far he had come in his own journey. The man who had once struggled to express emotion now found himself regularly moved to tears by the stories he encountered, and he no longer saw this as weakness but as a sign of his capacity for genuine connection. As autumn returned, marking the anniversary of Catherine's diagnosis, the family decided to commemorate the date not with sadness but with celebration. They organized a private gathering at Adelaide Cottage, inviting some of the people who had been most important during Catherine's treatment journey. Dr. Harrison and his medical team attended, along with Mrs. Eleanor Price and several other patients from the treatment center. Catherine's hair had grown back fuller and shinier than before, and she wore it in a simple style that had become her new signature look. The physical changes from her illness were now barely visible, but the inner transformation was evident to everyone who knew her well. "A year ago, I thought this disease might take everything from me," Catherine said as the group gathered in the garden where she had first read Dr. Matthew's letter. "Instead, it taught me what really matters and showed me the incredible kindness that exists in the world. In some ways, I'm grateful for the journey, as difficult as it was." 5 years had passed since Catherine's final treatment session, and the word remission had gradually given way to the even more beautiful word, cured. The family had settled into a new rhythm of life, one informed by the hard-won wisdom that every ordinary day was actually an extraordinary gift. On this particular morning in early spring, Catherine stood in the same garden where she had once received the devastating news that changed everything. But today, she was preparing for something entirely different. The opening of the Catherine Foundation Center for Cancer Care, a comprehensive facility that would provide both medical treatment and emotional support for patients and families facing serious illness. The center had been her passion project for the past 3 years, born from her own experience and designed to address every gap she had identified during her treatment journey. It would offer not just medical care, but also counseling services, family support programs, and practical assistance with everything from childcare to transportation. William watched from the kitchen window as Catherine walked among the flower beds, checking on the spring bulbs that were just beginning to emerge. The sight of her moving confidently through the garden, healthy and strong, still filled him with gratitude so profound it sometimes took his breath away. "Mummy's happy today," observed Louis, now 10 years old and blessed with remarkable emotional intelligence for his age. He had been carefully observing his mother's moods and expressions since he was small, a habit developed during her illness that had never quite faded. "She's excited about the opening ceremony," Charlotte explained, looking up from the science project she was working on at the kitchen table. At 14, she had indeed pursued her interest in medicine and was already planning her path toward medical school. "Did you know that her center is going to help more than 1,000 families every year?" George, now 18 and preparing for university, had chosen to study both medicine and public service, inspired by watching his parents turn personal crisis into public good. "The ripple effects will be much larger than that," he said thoughtfully. "Every family they help will go on to help others. It's going to change how people experience serious illness." The opening ceremony that afternoon was attended by medical professionals from around the world, along with patients and families who had participated in the planning process. Catherine had insisted that the voices of people who had actually experienced serious illness be central to every aspect of the center's design and programming. Mrs. Eleanor Price, now 87 and Catherine's dear friend, had been given the honor of cutting the ribbon. Her hands shook slightly as she held the ceremonial scissors, but her voice was strong as she spoke to the gathered crowd. "This center represents something revolutionary," she said. "It treats not just the disease but the whole person and the whole family. It recognizes that healing involves much more than medicine, important as medicine is." Catherine's speech that day was deeply personal, drawing on her own journey while acknowledging the privilege that had shaped her experience. She spoke about the fear, the uncertainty, and the profound gratitude that had defined her illness and recovery. "When I was diagnosed, I had access to the best medical care in the world," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "But I also had something equally important: hope, love, and an entire community of people who believed in my recovery. This center is designed to ensure that every person who walks through these doors has access to both excellent medical care and that crucial sense of hope and community." The audience included many people who had written to Catherine during her illness, along with medical professionals who had cared for her and fellow patients who had shared her journey. The diversity of the crowd reflected the universal nature of illness and the equally universal power of compassion and support. After the ceremony, Catherine walked through the center with Dr. Harrison, who had agreed to serve as the facility's chief medical officer. The treatment rooms were designed with large windows overlooking gardens, and each patient area included comfortable seating for family members. Art therapy studios, meditation spaces, and children's play areas were integrated throughout the building. "You've created something truly special here," Dr. Harrison told Catherine as they visited the family consultation rooms where difficult conversations would be handled with extra care and privacy. "This will change the standard of care for patients facing serious illness." That evening, the family gathered for a quiet dinner at Adelaide Cottage, reflecting on the day's significance. The opening of the center represented not just Catherine's personal triumph over illness, but their family's transformation of trauma into purpose. "I've been thinking about something," Catherine said as they lingered over dessert. "When I was sick, I used to imagine what recovery would look like. I thought it would mean going back to exactly how things were before." She paused, looking around the table at her family. But recovery turned out to be something completely different. It wasn't about going back. It was about going forward with a deeper understanding of what really matters: William reached for her hand across the table, a gesture that had become automatic during the difficult days and had remained a constant source of comfort in the good times. "You've helped so many people find their own path to recovery," he said, "not just from illness but from fear and despair." George spoke up with the wisdom that seemed to come naturally to him. "I think what Mummy created today will outlast all of us. The center will help people for generations, and the model will be copied around the world." One diagnosis turned into hope for thousands of families. Charlotte nodded enthusiastically. "And I'm going to work there someday after I finish medical school. I want to help people the way the doctors helped you, Mummy." Louis, ever practical despite his young age, had a different observation. "I think the best part is that we're all still here together. Even when everything was scary, we didn't give up on each other." Later that night, as Catherine prepared for bed, she found herself looking through the scrapbook she had kept during her treatment. The pages documented not just her medical journey, but the letters, drawings, and photographs that had sustained her through the most challenging period of her life. One page held Charlotte's drawing of their family under a rainbow, the artwork that had given Catherine hope during her darkest moments. Another contained a pressed flower from the garden at Adelaide Cottage, picked on the day she received the news that her treatment was working. The final pages of the scrapbook were dedicated to what came after. Photos from the center's construction, letters from families who had already been helped by Catherine's advocacy work, and newspaper clippings about improvements in cancer care that had been inspired by her public discussion of her own experience. William found her there, sitting cross-legged on their bedroom floor with the scrapbook spread around her like a paper timeline of transformation. "Remembering?" he asked, settling beside her on the carpet. "Marveling," Catherine replied. "Look at this journey. It started with the worst news we could imagine, and somehow it led to something beautiful and useful and lasting." She picked up a letter from a young mother who had written to thank Catherine for speaking openly about her experience. The woman had recognized early symptoms because of Catherine's public health campaigns and had caught her own illness. In time for successful treatment, "This woman is alive because you were brave enough to share your story," William said, reading over her shoulder. "Her children have their mother because you turned your private pain into public purpose." They sat together in comfortable silence, surrounded by the evidence of how love and determination could transform even the most frightening experiences into something meaningful. The scrapbook told a story that was both deeply personal and universally relevant. The story of how human beings could face their worst fears and emerge not just intact, but stronger and more compassionate. Outside their bedroom window, the lights of London twinkled in the distance, representing millions of people going about their daily lives, many of them unaware that their future would be a little brighter, because a princess had faced her illness with courage and used her platform to help others do the same. As Catherine closed the scrapbook and prepared for sleep, she felt a profound sense of completion. The scared woman who had received devastating news in a doctor's office 5 years ago had evolved into someone she couldn't have imagined becoming. A person whose greatest crisis had become her greatest contribution to the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve, and new moments of ordinary happiness with the family she had once feared losing. But tonight, surrounded by the quiet peace of her home and the steady presence of the man who had never left her side, Catherine fell asleep knowing that whatever the future might hold, they were ready to face it together. The world had indeed wept when they thought they might lose her, but it had also celebrated when she emerged stronger than ever, carrying with her a message of hope that would echo far beyond her own story. That love, properly applied, really could conquer anything.